Stop chasing approval. It's a never-ending performance. Your worth isn't in people's applause, but in God's purpose for you. Not everyone will understand your calling, and that's okay. Anchor your identity in faith, walk in quiet obedience, and live for heaven's well done, not the world's well liked. We all crave connection. We want to be seen, heard, and valued. There's something deeply human about the desire for affirmation. It begins early and grows with us. But somewhere along the way, what starts as a healthy desire for connection can turn into a silent addiction, the need for approval. And unlike obvious addictions, this one hides in plain sight. It's dressed up in kindness, performance, people-pleasing, perfectionism. But behind it is the exhausting pressure to keep being who others want you to be. Seeking approval feels good temporarily. The praise, the likes, the compliments, the applause, they can lift your spirits for a moment, but like a sugar rush, the high fades quickly and you're left wanting more. It's never enough. You do one thing right and the bar moves. You meet expectations today and there are new ones tomorrow. And soon you're not making decisions from a place of conviction. You're reacting to others' opinions. You're editing your words, second-guessing your passions, and shrinking your voice, all in the name of being accepted. What makes this approval-seeking so dangerous is that it's sneaky. It doesn't look toxic on the outside. In fact, it can be praised. She's so thoughtful. He's always there for everyone. They never say no. But under the surface, it becomes soul-deep compromise. You start living someone else's version of your life, and you lose sight of who you were created to be. The danger grows when approval becomes the measure of your value. You start tying your self-worth to how people respond to you. If they like you, you're good. If they don't, you're crushed. That's not peace, that's a prison. It's a cycle that leaves you more insecure, more confused, and more disconnected from your own identity. And in the process, you slowly silence the voice of purpose inside you. There's nothing wrong with encouragement or being appreciated. But when your identity depends on it, you're in trouble. You can't live a life of faith and also be enslaved to public opinion, because the calling on your life won't always come with claps. Sometimes it comes with silence. Sometimes it comes with resistance. And if you're addicted to approval, you'll walk away from purpose just to stay liked. Real freedom comes when you stop needing everyone to agree with your decisions, when you stop trying to earn your value and start living from a place of already being enough. That shift only happens when your identity is rooted in something deeper than people's opinions, when it's rooted in truth, in faith, in who God says you are. Approval may feel good in the moment, but it's not what sustains you. It's not where joy is found. And the sooner you stop chasing it, the sooner you step into a life that's real, whole, and unapologetically yours. In a world that constantly tells you who to be, what to do, and how to appear, it's easy to lose yourself. One moment you're confident, the next you're unsure because someone else's voice gets louder than your own. Opinions surround us, friends, family, social media, culture. Everyone has something to say about who you should be. If you're not careful, you start building your identity on shifting foundations, performance, appearance, success, or acceptance. And when those things falter, and they always do, you're left questioning who you are. That's where faith becomes not just a belief, but a lifeline. Faith, when deeply rooted, gives you something culture can't: consistency. While the world changes its standards every few months, faith reminds you of a truth that doesn't move. It tells you that your value isn't earned through performance or appearance. It's not based on how many people agree with you, support you, or even understand you. Faith grounds you in something eternal, something that says you are known, chosen, loved, and created on purpose. It gives you the courage to walk in identity, not insecurity. When your identity is anchored in faith, you stop being swayed by every wave of opinion. You stop chasing trends and start walking in truth. You don't need constant affirmation to feel secure, because your worth isn't attached to outcomes. It's rooted in who God says you are. You're not defined by your past mistakes or present achievements. You're not confined by others' labels or limited by your own doubts. Faith calls you higher. It reminds you that you're made in the image of God with a purpose that predates your performance. It doesn't mean the noise of the world disappears. The opinions will still be loud. The pressure will still come. But when faith is your anchor, you're not tossed around by every comment or criticism. You can stand still. You can move with peace. You can say no without guilt and yes without fear. You stop trying to prove something and start living from a place of already being approved by the one who made you. And in that space where your identity is not up for debate, you find freedom. You're free to grow without fear of failure. You're free to lead, to create, to love, to serve, not to earn value, but because you already carry it. Faith becomes more than something you believe. It becomes the lens through which you see yourself and the foundation from which you live your life. In the end, identity shaped by faith doesn't just survive the pressure of the world, it transforms how you respond to it. You live differently. You speak with clarity. You lead with conviction. You no longer shrink to fit in or stretch yourself thin to please others. You know who you are, and more importantly, you know whose you are. And that changes everything. Popularity is loud. It demands attention, applause, and validation. It wants to be seen, shared, liked, and followed. And in a world where visibility often equals value, it's easy to believe that being popular is the goal. But the truth is, popularity is temporary. It's fragile, conditional, and often built on shallow foundations. One moment you're celebrated, the next you're forgotten or criticized. It constantly shifts with people's preferences. And if you're not careful, you start shaping your life around what will get the most approval rather than what carries the most purpose. Purpose, on the other hand, is quiet. It doesn't always look impressive. It doesn't need to be broadcasted or praised. Purpose is the reason you were created. It's the call that pulls you forward even when no one is watching. It demands more from you than popularity ever will. Purpose asks for sacrifice, discipline, integrity, and persistence. It requires you to dig deep and keep going, even when applause is absent and affirmation is scarce. Choosing purpose over popularity means choosing to be faithful, not flashy. It means doing the right thing, even when it's the unpopular thing. It means standing firm in your values, even when it costs you followers, approval, or status. There will be moments when choosing purpose feels lonely. People might question your path. They might not understand your decisions. But popularity was never the measure of success. Impact was. Some of the most purpose-driven people in history weren't liked by everyone. In fact, they were misunderstood, rejected, even hated for what they stood for. But they stayed focused. They stayed committed. They understood that being true to their calling mattered more than being accepted by the crowd. They weren't chasing comfort. They were pursuing impact. And impact often requires courage to be different. Purpose doesn't need a stage. It just needs your yes. It's not measured in likes, but in legacy. It's found in the quiet choices, the hidden sacrifices, the faithful steps that no one may see but God. And ironically, when you live for purpose, not attention, you end up influencing more people than you would by chasing popularity. There's nothing wrong with being liked. It feels good to be seen and appreciated. But when that becomes the goal, you lose sight of the deeper reason you're here. Popularity wants you to fit in. Purpose calls you to stand out. Popularity changes with trends. Purpose is rooted in truth. One fades quickly, the other lasts forever. So the challenge is this: when the choice comes, and it will, between being popular and being purposeful, choose purpose. When the pressure builds to perform for people instead of living for something greater, return to your why. Stay grounded in your faith. Stay connected to your calling. Don't trade what's eternal for what's easy. You weren't made to be liked. You were made to make a difference. And purpose is always worth it. One of the most difficult truths to accept when you start walking in your calling is that not everyone will understand it. Some people will question it, some will ignore it, others will outright oppose it. And often it's not strangers who struggle to understand. It's the people closest to you. The ones you hoped would cheer you on may be the ones who remain silent. The ones you thought would believe in your vision might be the first to doubt it. That can be deeply painful, especially when all you want is support on a path that already feels uncertain. But here's the reality. Your calling wasn't a conference call. It wasn't handed out in a group chat. It was given specifically to you. God didn't ask for a vote before planting that purpose in your heart. He didn't check with your peers or wait for your parents' approval before giving you that dream. It's personal, it's sacred, and that means it won't always make sense to others. When people don't understand your calling, they might criticize it, not out of malice, but out of misunderstanding. Some will project their fears onto you. They'll tell you it's unrealistic, too risky, too different. They'll try to protect you by encouraging you to play it safe. Others may react from a place of insecurity. Your growth, your boldness, your obedience can expose their own areas of comfort or compromise. And rather than confront that, it's easier to question your direction. That's why you have to learn to stand firm even when the voices around you are uncertain. Faithfulness to your calling often means walking roads others can't see. Abraham had to leave his country without knowing exactly where he was going. Moses had to return to Egypt with nothing but a staff and God's word. Mary had to carry a child that no one understood. Time and time again, the people God used were misunderstood, and yet they moved forward anyway. You're not responsible for making your calling understandable. You're responsible for being obedient to it. Clarity often comes in hindsight. What looks confusing today might make perfect sense later. When the fruit starts to show, when the impact begins to spread, when the steps you took in faith lead to something undeniable. But don't wait for applause to begin. If you know God placed something inside you, that's enough. It takes maturity to walk forward without validation. It takes courage to keep building when people don't see the vision yet. But remember, God doesn't waste obedience. He honors it. Your job is not to convince everyone of your calling. It's to carry it with integrity, consistency, and trust. So when others don't understand, don't be discouraged. You were never called to be understood by everyone. You were called to be faithful to the one who understands you completely. Keep going. You're not crazy. You're just called. Rejection is one of the most painful human experiences. It cuts deep, not just because someone says no to what you do, but because it often feels like a no to who you are. It leaves you questioning your worth, your purpose, even your identity. But when we look at the life of Jesus, the perfect, sinless Son of God, we see that rejection is not a sign of failure. It's part of the path of obedience. Jesus was rejected repeatedly. He was rejected by his own hometown, where the people who watched him grow up couldn't believe that someone so familiar could carry such authority. "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" they asked. Their doubt wasn't about his message, but their inability to see past their assumptions. That rejection hurt, and Scripture says he could do very few miracles there because of their lack of faith. Jesus was rejected by the religious elite, the very people who claimed to know God best. They were threatened by his wisdom, offended by his grace, and hostile toward his power. He challenged their traditions and exposed their hypocrisy, and they responded not with humility, but with hatred. They plotted against him, falsely accused him, and ultimately played a role in his crucifixion. Even his own disciples, the ones closest to him, failed to stand by him in his most vulnerable moments. Judas betrayed him. Peter denied him. The rest scattered when the pressure came. Imagine pouring your heart into people, teaching them, leading them, loving them, and then facing the greatest trial of your life alone. That's rejection on the deepest level. And yet, Jesus never let rejection define him or derail his purpose. He didn't change his message to be more palatable. He didn't shrink his mission to make people more comfortable. He didn't stop healing, loving, forgiving, or teaching because of the rejection he faced. He stayed the course. Because he wasn't living for human approval, he was walking in divine assignment. There's comfort in knowing that even Jesus, who did everything perfectly, wasn't accepted by everyone. It reminds us that rejection isn't always a reflection of what we're doing wrong. Sometimes it's confirmation that we're doing something right. When you walk in truth, when you carry purpose, when you live by faith, you will face resistance. You will be misunderstood. And yes, you will be rejected. But rejection isn't the end of the story. In Jesus' case, it led to the cross. But the cross led to resurrection. What looked like defeat became the greatest victory. And the same God who raised him is working in your story too. Rejection may sting, but it cannot stop what God has ordained. So don't let fear of rejection silence your voice or shrink your calling. If Jesus faced it and still fulfilled his purpose, so can you. Keep walking, keep trusting. You're in good company. Praise feels good. There's something affirming about being seen, recognized, and appreciated. A kind word, a compliment, a public acknowledgement, it can lift your spirit and give you a sense of momentum. But what begins as encouragement can quietly turn into dependence if you're not careful. Over time, you can start living for the praise instead of the purpose. What used to be fuel becomes a leash, and before you know it, you're not free anymore. You're trapped in the expectations of others, adjusting your actions to keep the applause going. When you depend on people's praise, you start building your identity around it. You only feel valuable when someone is affirming you. You feel anxious when no one notices. You begin to shape your decisions based on what will be accepted, admired, or applauded. This becomes a prison because your sense of peace, worth, and direction is tied to something outside of your control. People's opinions are unstable. They shift with trends, moods, and misunderstandings. If their praise built you up, their silence or criticism can tear you down. Living for praise often leads to performance. You put on a version of yourself that you think people want to see. You hide your struggles, downplay your convictions, and exaggerate your strengths. Not because you're trying to be deceptive, but because you're afraid of disappointing someone. Over time, you lose the ability to be authentic. You start managing your image more than living your truth. You become a character in a story others are writing, instead of walking out the one God gave you. This kind of life is exhausting. You never feel like you can rest because there's always someone to impress, something to prove. You live in fear of being misunderstood or forgotten. You shrink from taking bold steps because they might not be popular. You hesitate to obey God fully because the cost might include losing approval from people you care about. The prison tightens every time you say yes to people and no to what you know is right. But the truth is, you weren't created to live for the crowd. You were created to live in purpose, with conviction, and from a place of freedom. God's approval is steady. It's not based on your performance. It's based on your identity as His child. When you anchor yourself in His voice, you're no longer swayed by every cheer or crushed by every silence. You can show up authentically. You can make hard decisions. You can walk in boldness, not because everyone agrees with you, but because you know who sent you. Praise isn't bad, but it's not supposed to be your foundation. Encouragement can be helpful, but it should never be your compass. When you stop needing constant validation, you start living in true freedom. And in that freedom, your impact grows. Not because you're trying to please people, but because you're finally walking in the fullness of who you were created to be. In a world obsessed with visibility, noise, and recognition, quiet obedience seems almost invisible. It's not flashy, it doesn't trend. No one claps when you wake up early to pray, forgive someone who hurt you, or make a decision that no one understands but God. Quiet obedience is often unseen, but it's never insignificant. It's the secret strength of a life deeply rooted in faith. Obedience isn't about perfection, it's about surrender. It's choosing to trust God's voice above your own logic, emotions, or the opinions of others. And it often happens in private. It's in the moments when no one's watching that real obedience is tested. Will you still serve when there's no applause? Will you still forgive when there's no apology? Will you still move forward even when you don't see the outcome? The world teaches us to measure success by visibility. How many people notice, follow, like, or celebrate. But heaven measures success by faithfulness. Some of the most powerful work God does in and through us begins in the hidden place. That quiet yes to God may not make sense to others. It may look slow, small, or strange. But over time, that quiet obedience builds strength, character, and spiritual authority. Jesus modeled this perfectly. Before he ever performed a miracle, preached a sermon, or gathered crowds, he spent 30 years in obscurity. No platform, no fanfare, just quiet preparation. He learned obedience through everyday faithfulness, working in a carpenter's shop, honoring his parents, spending time in prayer. That hidden season wasn't wasted, it was foundational. And when his public ministry began, it was sustained by the quiet strength built in the secret place. When you walk in quiet obedience, you start to live for an audience of one. You stop needing to be understood by everyone, and you find peace in simply being known by God. Your security no longer depends on outcomes, validation, or timing. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just walking with God. That's where peace lives. That's where purpose grows. Obedience is often inconvenient. It rarely aligns with comfort or popularity. It might require you to step away from things others chase. It might call you to take a risk no one else sees. But what obedience may cost in the short term, it returns in deep reward. There's a clarity, a strength, and a confidence that comes from walking closely with God, even when the path is lonely. Not every assignment needs to be announced. Not every act of faith needs to be posted. Some of the most powerful movements of God begin with a quiet yes from someone no one's watching. And in a noisy world, that kind of obedience stands out, not because it's loud, but because it's real. Quiet obedience may not get you noticed, but it will get you where you're meant to go. It keeps you grounded, humble, and aligned. And in the end, it's not the loudest life that leaves the greatest impact. It's the one most faithful to God's voice. There's a deep hunger in the human heart to be liked, to be accepted, to be celebrated. It starts early. We learn quickly what behaviors earn praise, what choices make us stand out, and what words make people clap. We chase affirmation like it's the prize, but the applause of people, while loud, is fleeting. It can feel good for a moment, but leave you empty after the lights fade. That's why living for the approval of the crowd is a dangerous game, because what people like today, they can cancel tomorrow. The same voices that cheer can also criticize. The same platforms that elevate can just as quickly erase. But there's a different kind of approval that doesn't shift. It doesn't come from popularity or applause. It comes from faithfulness. It comes from heaven. And it sounds like this: well done, good and faithful servant. Not well followed, not well known, not well liked, just well done. That's the reward that actually matters. That's the finish line worth running toward. You don't need a big stage to hear those words. You don't need a viral platform, a blue check mark, or a crowd chanting your name. Heaven's well done is handed out to the faithful, the ones who stayed the course, even when no one noticed, the ones who obeyed quietly, gave generously, forgave quickly, served humbly. It's for the ones who kept showing up when it would have been easier to walk away. It's for the ones who weren't perfect, but they were faithful. Chasing the world's approval is exhausting. It's a never-ending cycle of performing, adjusting, and pleasing. You can lose yourself trying to be what everyone else wants you to be. But living for God's approval brings peace. It brings freedom. It allows you to walk in purpose without needing to be popular. It gives you the courage to stand for truth even when it's unpopular, to walk in integrity when no one's watching, to stay faithful even when it costs you something. Jesus didn't live to be liked. He lived to fulfill a mission, and because of that, he was misunderstood, rejected, and ultimately crucified. But he didn't need the crowd's affirmation. He was anchored in his Father's will, and that's the same posture we're called to carry. Not arrogance, not indifference, but conviction. A quiet, grounded assurance that we're here to please God, not people. Living for well done might mean being overlooked. It might mean losing friends, missing opportunities, or walking away from things that the world celebrates. But it also means walking in peace, purpose, and identity. It means being fully known by the one who matters most. It means building a life that lasts, one obedient step at a time. You weren't created to be famous. You were created to be faithful. Don't trade eternal impact for temporary applause. Don't compromise your calling for the comfort of being liked. Because when the dust settles, when the crowds disappear, and when your life is laid bare, only one opinion will matter, and his words, well done, will be worth it all. In the journey of life, seeking approval from others can feel natural, but it often leads to emptiness and confusion. When we anchor our identity in faith and embrace our true purpose, we find freedom beyond the shifting opinions of the world. Like Jesus, who faced rejection yet remained faithful, we too can walk in quiet obedience, trusting that God's approval matters far more than fleeting praise. Choosing purpose over popularity may be difficult, but it leads to a life of meaning, peace, and lasting impact. So let us fix our eyes on the eternal, living not to be well-liked, but to hear the priceless words, well done, good and faithful servant. That is where true fulfillment and freedom reside.